Welcome everyone to our webinar on Do Your Sellers Have the Skills They Need to Win? We're really excited to join you today. While folks are logging into the webinar, pop us a line in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from. I've seen the registration list. We have got a global audience and we're excited to hear from you. So we want to see, let us know where you're joining. Maybe tell us what you're most excited about learning today in our session. And we are excited to have Dr. Howard Dover joining us. He is going to share some great insights on technology and how it's impacting sales and the skills that our sellers need right now to be successful in today's market. He has a wealth of knowledge and expertise in this area. He's written a book. We're going to dig into that as well. And a little housekeeping item before we really dig into the content. Today's webinar will be recorded and you will receive that via email. As we are going through today, please feel free to add comments to the chat, pop us some questions in the Q&A. We will try to get to those as we go along, or definitely try to address those towards the end of the webinar. So thank you again for joining. I am Michelle Richardson. If you are new to our webinar series, I'm the Vice President of Sales Performance Research. And as I mentioned, we have Dr. Howard Dover joining us today. He is the founder and director of the Center for Professional Sales at the University of Texas at Dallas. And before entering academia, he has experience founding several companies. He has worked with startups and with the government, and has really worked to harness his own ability to see how technology increases the efficiency of business processes and the effectiveness of sales efforts. He frequently shares findings at conferences and in publications. And like his current book, The Sales Innovation Paradox. And welcome, Dr. Dover. We're so excited to have you.
Great to be with you. Looking forward to our discussion.
Absolutely. And it looks like we've got folks joining from Raleigh, from Detroit, from Wisconsin. This is awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's go and get into our content. We're going to be talking about why using technology doesn't guarantee better performance, why sellers are not ready for today's market, and the new skills that they need for success, and then strategies to drive results with both efficiency and effectiveness. So, Dr. Dover, I know in your book, you talk about the sales innovation paradox. And one of the things you found is that investing in technology doesn't necessarily generate greater sales effectiveness or efficacy. So why is that? Tell us a little bit more.
Well, the efficiency and effectiveness is the challenge we're kind of looking at. At the end of the day, when we invest in technology, so let me backtrack just a little bit and say, in my past life, when I deployed technology to business processes, for example, for the state of Oregon, I was put on a project that took 30 to 40 hours to complete a report. And we deployed some technology there, and that report was generated within 15 minutes. So these are the kind of things we're looking for, right? And there's a theory called the experience curve that says, the more we do something and we add technology to it, the less expensive it becomes. So really what kind of piqued my interest is I saw all the technology being developed, all the point solutions, the sales stack solutions. And yet at the same time, I saw us increase the number of people who were doing outbound outreach. So, we spend billions of dollars on technology, and yet we increase the number of people using that technology by 13x. And so to me, that made no sense. That seemed like we're doing the opposite of an experience curve, the opposite of an efficiency gain. So this became a question to me: why are we doing this? What's going on? If we're investing in technology and getting more efficient, we should actually see headcount reduction, not headcount expansion. Now, there's some other reasons why we had an aggregate headcount expansion, but so that was the question, right? That's what started this whole process of saying, I watched organization after organization ramp up and then let everybody go because it didn't work. And so that became this thing to say, well, why do we keep repeating this process? And yet it's not technology's fault. It's not that the technology is bad. The technology actually is quite interesting. It's apparently just that we aren't deploying it properly, or we're deploying it on a baseline that actually wasn't well equipped to begin with.
Interesting. Okay, so we're using it in the wrong ways, essentially, without kind of thinking through maybe, how we can marry, as you said, the head count with the gains that we get in technology, or the skill set with the gains we get in technology.
Well, I think part of the phenomena is I think you've read the book. It's the back of the book is interesting if you're more on the strategic side.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to a senior level leader, and I said to him, and he's a global leader for a B2C company in the luxury space. And I said, if I could show you how to increase the efficiency of your sales organization, meaning you get more with the same group of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's very direct. I said, what's the first thing you'll do? And he said, oh, I'd go hire more people. And I said, I'm confused. Why would you go out and hire more people? So I did a LinkedIn poll and said, all right. And the challenge that I have is that I have a lot of friends in the sales enablement space that follow me. And so my sales enablement friends, I said, if you could increase the efficiency of your sales org, and then defined it, right? Do more,
Mm-hmm.
the same people.
Mm-hmm.
What's the first thing you would do? Would you, number one, increase headcount? Number two, hold it steady and see what happens. Number three, decrease headcount. Those who were sales leaders, not enablement leaders, those who were sales leaders, 80% of them said I would increase headcount.
Wow.
So odd. So that's the
Yeah.
inertia, right? That's where we've got the inertia problem is,
Right.
oh my gosh, if I could plow the field fast, by golly, let me get more tractors and more people and just get it. Let me get as much land done as possible, as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And so that's part of our challenge here, right? Is that once we get this efficiency gain, it's saying, can I travel the white space faster? And so naturally the people say, well, then I want to go faster and I'm going to tool up.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of our first problems, right? Is that we have a little bit of a managerial problem here, that we have a tendency to scale up when we feel we've identified something that's working, which I guess if you have an infinite white space, that works. But most markets are finite.
Yeah.
And that's where the problem comes in, right? Is that most markets become finite. And it gets even worse because if you're doing the same thing everybody else is doing, everybody's plowing the same white space simultaneously. And there's a customer reaction that then naturally comes from that.
Yeah. And that was I think a big aha for me. And I have read your book. I have highlighted it, I've bookmarked it. Highly recommend for the insights, but it's kind of like the bullet point we have here on the slide. Like, so if on the seller side, you are ramping up your outreach capacity, your ability to kind of take that prospecting and that message out to the market. So you're building it up with technology, and you're multiplying the people that are then using that technology. But the people that you're prospecting to, your potential prospects and buyers, that really hasn't grown to that extent. So now it's just more people, more messages going to your prospects. So now they're inundated.
They are inundated, right? It's so when you look at it and you say, if just the SDR motion itself, which is outbound, right? Primarily outbound, some of it's inbound, but we just take the outbound story and say, from within the last 8 years, we went from a multiple of 1, if we look at 1 as the baseline, and we're at 13 times that today.
Mm-hmm.
And at best estimate, Gartner was saying when the Challenger sale came out, they said there were 5.4 and then 6.8 decision makers. I think they're now up to 12. So let's give everybody credit that maybe there's 2 times the number of buyers, maybe
Right.
at the same time frame. So we have 2 times the number of buyers, but 13 times the number of sellers. But that's not the full story, Michelle. We have deployed technology that allows that one person to do between 10 and 100 times the amount of outreach. Through straight automation and augmentation, we can now do, so we're now covering the market at 130 to 1300x with a 2x increase in buyers. So is it any wonder that Gartner is coming back and saying, hey, the sellers don't really want to talk to buyers. They want a rep-free experience. Really? Why?
Why?
Is that a shock to anybody? I mean, come on, at 130x outreach. And by the way, it's all such high quality stuff. It's really, really high quality.
Tongue in cheek, I'm sure, right?
Very tongue in cheek. And you know what? So let me pull back for a second. I'd like to say to a lot of people who do SDR work and BDR work, I don't think it's inherently their fault. They're being taught what to do. And there's kind of a reversion to, let me just do the same thing a lot of times. If it works, we scale it.
Right.
And so this becomes this false premise of best practices that we borrow from the manufacturing space, but yet we're dealing with human nature that's modifying constantly.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of things going on in this market, and they've all come to a head. And you know, I thought COVID would be the tipping point, but strangely enough, it was the venture capital bubble pop of the interest rates rising of Q4 of last year into the first 2 quarters of this year that completely dried up the SaaS VC space, that finally people are saying, oh, wait a minute, maybe we should be making money, not just generating activities.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. You mentioned the SaaS issue, and you talk about in the book the SaaSification essentially of sales, which is kind of that role specialization. So you're taking the sales role, maybe a traditional sales role where someone had to prospect and then, you know, find the lead and then carry it all the way through to kind of separating out outbound prospecting and then the account executive kind of follow-up sale. So what is that really then done in terms of skills? Because obviously now we're reaching more people, or at least we're putting messages out to more people at this exponential rate. And then if a seller does get an appointment, then they've got to come in and actually interact and connect with a buyer. So what does that then look like in terms of a seller's ability to really be successful in today's market?
So a lot there.
Yeah, sorry, multiple questions in one.
let me start with data, and then let me kind of set the groundwork, and then. So the first thing that I identified is when I did some early research, it was about 4 years ago, the headcount between sales reps in LinkedIn in the 20 major markets and sales development was an equal 50-50. When we went into COVID, that number had gone to 65-35. So we had a 2-to-1 ratio in favor of SDRs. And actually, there was a Forrester report that came out in 2015, which was a really good clickbait piece that said they predicted by 2020 there would be a headcount reduction in sales of 20%. Everybody was upset with them. They're like, oh my gosh, this is so, because technology should reduce headcount, right? I mean, this was their prediction. So the reason that didn't materialize is because of the SaaSification of the field. If you track just the sales roles from 2015 to 2009, you actually have a 22% headcount reduction. But in the same period of time, you have this expansion of the SDR function by 86%. So it actually dwarfs the 22% reduction in sales. So what we actually have is a realignment of what we're calling sales today. So the idea of this comes from two books. I've read them both. I've met a few of the authors. The first one is Predictive Revenue. So it's right. How did Salesforce get to the first 100 million? And it was because they had SDRs and AEs. And then Trish Bartuzzi, who's brilliant in this space, developed the sales development playbook. She said, hey, you really need to think about this and this concept of creating the roles. But I think what's interesting is I do like the work that Jocko is doing over at Winning by Design. I think he's one of the geniuses of our era. He just, I think he lives in a van and he travels around the Sierra Nevadas. I'm not kidding. I think he does do a lot of his work in a van, traveling around. The guy's got more energy than the Energizer Bunny. And he's a gift of his mind at this moment, because he's talking about the fact that, well, okay, actually, if you're going to do that, there's actually more roles because you actually have customer success. And actually, it actually breaks down. The whole thing starts to break down if you don't understand the financial dynamics of it. And there's kind of new revenue generating models. So that's the specialization of the field. So for this to work, we have to have a couple of principles at play, because the concept is economies of scale, right? So if I take the sales process, we take the old process, which is a single buy, not a recurring revenue buy, in a non-SaaS world, and we break that up and say we're going to get the sales development and then we're going to get the sales done. Or if you're in the SaaS world, you do the SDR work, the AE work, and then the customer success work. So the whole idea of economies of scale, that's why we do it. Specialization gives us economies of scale. Well, the whole premise of economies of scale is if I do the same thing a lot of times, then I get really efficient at the task. Here's the problem. If we look at the data on turnover in SDR space, the average SDR doesn't stay in the role for more than 15 months. So where's your economy of scale? Right when they get good at their job, they leave it. AEs, same problem. By the way, leadership in the SaaS space, same problem. So we have people turning over their roles faster than we can get the efficiency gain. Then it even gets worse, Michelle. We take SDRs, once again, not their fault. And what is the promotion path? If we're looking for specialization, we would say you're really good at being an SDR. Therefore, we're going to keep you as an SDR because you're really efficient at doing that motion. But no, we promote them to AE. Well, wait a minute, that's a completely different skill set. We're going from meeting setting to demo creating and maybe closing. I'm sorry, these are different skill sets. The ability to do one has absolutely no prediction and predictive validity that you can do the second one. And what's happened through this process, we've actually transactionalized. So if you think about the history of sales, right? You go back to Sir Neil Rackham's work and Miller Hyman's work that said, hey, we need to be better. We need to be more professional. We need to think about how to sell. So we got away from the transactional nature of the business. Tom Hopkins, I grew up on Tom Hopkins, the belly to belly, 20 belly to bellies a day and you win, right? It's all about
yes.
yes. And, Tom's got some great stuff out there. No offense to Tom, but we moved from kind of the, hey, it's all about getting in their face and being schmoozy, to maybe we need to be more professional, get away from transactionalizing. We move to value, conceptual selling, right? Some of these other different methodologies, the strategic sale from Miller Hyman, the challenger sale from the challenger people. And now we move back to transactionalization. By specialization, we say, oh, it's very, very simple. See, we simplified the motion and said, you're going to be really good at setting an appointment. You're going to be really good at doing a demo. And then we got a sales engineer who has to be really good at actually figuring out if it's going to work. But for the most part, we've transactionalized the process. And during the 13-year period of easy money, with the Fed moving the interest rates down to almost nothing, nobody could see that the emperor had no clothes, right? It was just working. It was just working. Everybody believed in it. Everybody was buying each other's stuff. And, oh, hey, it's another SDR. Or, oh, I'll help the SDR because we're SDRs. Oh, it's an AE. I'll be nice to the AE because everybody's got an AE. Well, now nobody's got money. And so all of a sudden, nobody's agreeing to appointments. The tracking on, I think I saw the last time, close rates are down in the teens in the tech sector, according to something being put out by Winning by Design. And I think 4% is the current quota attainment rate in the SaaS tech sector. That was some of the most recent data I saw. Talk about a system that is on life support. Why? Because it became transactionalized. Now we live in a world where you have to have skill. And unfortunately, we may be living with a lot of people who signed up to doing something that no longer works and no longer exists. They learn motions. They got really good at the motion, but that set of skills isn't working in this moment. Yeah. Which is sad. It's just sad for a lot of people. And I think what really concerns me is this is somebody who wants to buy a house. This is somebody who's trying to fund college education. This is somebody who's trying to support a family, right? These are people, now maybe they're partying and traveling all over the world, whatever their goals are. We're not just causing, this dilemma is bigger than that. It's actually, we're taking people's livelihoods and we've shown them how to do something and it doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. And so what is the corporate reaction to it? Headcount reduction and removal of training and remove the sales enablement people.
So really the thing that could help turn the tide, especially with, training, and certainly that's something that we would see and advocate for, we're taking it away because they're not successful. And I think it's really interesting too, that you're kind of bringing this to the human level. These are people with livelihoods who have been trained and conditioned in a certain market, and now that market, their skills do not fit. Yeah,
they learned how to use the tech stack. They used how to hack. They hacked their way through. It was all about hacking their way through with the transactional nature of the model. And now all of a sudden, nobody's agreeing to meetings. People aren't agreeing to early demos, small deals. All of a sudden now we have to come back and we got away with nice to have products. And now companies are saying, well, I can't buy nice to have. I got to buy need to haves and everything else has to be raw to the bone. And then of course we have generative AI, which is talk about the moving juggernaut right now.
Yeah, right.
And yet there are organizations that bust through this whole thing right now. Yeah. They're just doing amazing stuff. And I was just up in Toronto and there was a Dutch company. It was a global company. I won't use the names, I'll tell the story, but there was a Dutch company that had spent a year and a half completely focusing the organization on not just modern stuff, but actually getting them to understand everything they need to do. They doubled their sales over a 3-year period of time, but they reduced their headcount by 50%.
Wow.
But that's what you would expect, Michelle.
Right.
Right? We should see this in a lot of
Right.
places.
Yeah.
We should see it, but we're not. We are and we're not. There's about 5 to 10% of the market where we'll hear those kind of stories. But 90 to 95% of the market, we're not.
Yeah.
So we have to kind of get to the point where we say, well, what are those 5% doing? And what's the impediment for the other 95% to get there? And I think that's where a lot of leadership has to look. And then if you're an individual contributor, you have to kind of ask yourself, hey, how do I pivot to that 5% that actually is outperforming? How do I get the skills? How do I skill up? And maybe move to a more robust skill set.
Right. And I want to dig into that topic because that's something that we're certainly passionate about at the Brooks Group. We've had a couple of questions come in, and I think it kind of speaks a little to buyer preferences and expectations. So we had a question coming in on why is nobody agreeing to meetings? So, obviously the market conditions are changing, but
so let me answer it with an analogy, and then let me bring it up to speed. I think in the book, and even when I do presentations on this, if I can do a workshop, I have people come up and say, let's think about World War II. And all these, excuse the not woke concept here, but all these men came home from the war and there were no jobs for them. And so if you can imagine, the local shop, the local store, right, says to Johnny comes home and says, hey, Johnny, welcome back. And he said, well, thanks, but I really need a job. And they said, well, okay, Johnny, maybe you could go drive around to all the farms and take orders and then go back and drive and drop them off. And so you can imagine Johnny's been at the war and Johnny goes to the first farm, and maybe it's somebody he played football with, his family, and they go, Johnny, you're home. First off, Johnny's alive. And Johnny's at their front doorstep. And they say, Johnny, you're alive. You're welcome back. What are you doing? Oh, I'm working for the local store. And they say, oh, that's wonderful. Do you need anything? And they say, yeah, actually, thanks. Here's the list of items we need. And so Johnny goes and he goes to the next house, right? And so now when Johnny does this, a lot of things are happening, right? Everybody's happy to see Johnny. He's performing a valuable function to the buyer. Now, Fred comes home too. And the other store in town says, oh my gosh, that's working with Johnny. Let's hire Fred. So Fred goes up to the door and they go, Fred, you were the center of the football team. Good to see you. Oh my gosh, we gave everything to Johnny. But you know what? We forgot to tell him about the sack of seed we needed. Good thing you came, Fred. We want to help you too. Now, when the third person comes, at what point does the farmer go with the shotgun and say, get off my land? Is it fifth? Is it sixth? Is it 10th? Is it at what point does that? Now, what's interesting about this, Michelle, is, you know what? When Johnny comes back, he'll be welcomed. And when Fred comes back, he'll be welcomed because they establish value. So it's not the motion that's the problem. It's the fact that the buyer has been modified. So that's the first thing to realize, is we kind of dug our own hole here. When you think 130x shooting at I'm using language intentionally, shooting at the buyer. Do you really think the buyer's just going to go, oh, I'm just going to sit here and take it?
Right.
No, they created defensive mechanisms to avoid everything you're doing. Now they don't have budget. They don't have budget. Things are tight. People are scrutinizing everything. So you got a double whammy now. You got higher interest rates. You've got tightening budgets. You've got CFOs involved in decision making, and you already ruined the white space with the overutilization of the space. Yeah. You've plowed over the white space along with everybody else so much that you didn't establish value. Why aren't they taking meetings? Because they didn't value them before either.
Yeah. and the seller's really not doing anything to differentiate or communicate to the buyer that time with them is valuable, that there is value in that conversation.
Well, I think years ago, I'm forgetting who made the comment. It's probably Jill Raleigh from years ago. She talked about the fact of deposits. I know Beck Holland talks about this too, is deposits and withdrawals.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm meeting you for the first time and I pitch slap you, I just took a withdrawal. Now, if I provide value, now this is debatable. I'm okay with the debate on this, that you can get into weird stuff. But in general, if I'm going to have a long-term relationship with you, and I start off with a withdrawal, take your time but give no value. That usually doesn't go over well for most of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of our fundamental problem. And I was talking to Jim Dickey the other day, and he told me a story that just blew my mind about in the farming sector, how they're going to be able to sell in the future. He said they used to take them to a Cornhuskers game to try to get their attention. He said, well, now, given all the AI and all of the information that they can have as a company, they can come in and say, hey, by the way, we're looking at the current crop conditions, the overall yield, and all these different data points. And so I was wondering if, it seems optimal for you to move your harvest back by a few weeks. And if that's the case, you probably need an extension on this, you probably need that, right? And they're literally saying, let me advise you, Mr. Farmer, Mrs. Farmer, on the optimal harvest, and let me provide you the data to be at the peak opportunity financially. Mm-hmm. I don't know, but if I get that call and I'm a farmer, I don't know that I'm going, I think I value that more than the Cornhuskers game.
Yeah.
And it'd be nice if you took me to the Cornhuskers game as well, right?
Right.
But
yeah.
I think if I had to take one or the other, I think I'm going to take the optimize my crop rotation, my crop. And so
mm-hmm.
you start thinking about what's possible today with the new tools and the automation, the augmentation, the ability to really bring new perception, concepts, and intelligence to the buyer to tell them enough about their business and why,
mm-hmm.
And bring something to the table. All of a sudden, you're making a deposit to me, and I'm ready to listen. But I think for too long, I think we said, "Hey, I can increase your velocity." Well, I've been fooled before.
Right. Yeah.
So
what I like about that example, is using technology, like the technology kind of supplemented the sales skills. So being able to take the data and being able to convey it to a potential customer in a way that brings value, as opposed to
So that's our challenge, right? Is relevancy is the currency of today.
Yeah.
I can be relevant to you as a business, then you're going to give me time all day long. But that has to be within the context of my business, not your product. And given that we just transactionalized our motions, I don't know how many people own the skill to do this well.
Yeah.
From what I'm hearing from a lot of my colleagues, it's not going well. But with that becomes another challenge, and that is that we have to have the business acumen
mm-hmm.
and the analytical skills. So we did a project with some of my friends up in Canada. One of my colleagues, Karen Piesker, approached LinkedIn, and I had been asking LinkedIn for this data from Economic Graph for years. So we collaborated with John Lister and some of the research team at LinkedIn, and we said, what's the number one skill of the future that salespeople need to have? because LinkedIn has all that data,
Mhm.
right? They have all of the job postings, they have all of the skills that people, right? So they have access to worldwide information on what is everybody looking for right now. Number one skill, analytical skill. Analytical skill is the skill of the future. And why is that? Because I have to be able to take lots of information and understand its context to the current client. That's analytical skill. So to be able to do this, I need analytical skill and I need business acumen. And I need to harness the technology, the tools. So the tools, I harness them to give me the intelligence, but then I have to have the analytical skill to deploy them to my customer. Now, generative AI is going to help us a lot here if we're careful. Otherwise, it's just going to be doubling down on stupid again, which is where we're seeing a lot of early moves or double down on stupid. But for the better companies, this is really going to augment the capacity of somebody to learn what analytical skill looks like. So I have a lot of hope that we're going to really be able to transform through training. I know that some of us are in some preliminary, there's some stealth projects that I'm aware of that are going in this direction. I'm very excited about how, because the relevancy is huge. Because when I'm relevant, it does something really important. It increases the efficacy of my effort. What do I mean by efficacy? When I first heard the word efficacy and efficiency, it jumbled my mind. But now I love it, because productivity comes from one of two sources. It comes from efficiency or efficacy. If you combine the two, you get exponential. Now, usually what you need to do is you got to work on efficacy first, and then you deploy efficiency. When you do it in that way, you get exponential results, and it's absolutely incredible. It's the kind of stuff where you see 2x performance with a 50% headcount reduction. So if we can get people to harness the technology to enhance their knowledge, then they can, if we can get them to learn to deploy that knowledge to the customer, then the customer actually has greater value. Example, what we did this semester, last semester at UTD with a project. This was sandboxy. So it's really dirty data. We had our students run their preliminary emails through ChatGPT, and then we had them run it through Lavender. So these are two AI tools. And you got to realize the average college student has written about 0 outbound emails, and they will cut and paste like crazy if you give them the time. If you give them the shot to do that, that's all they'll do is cut and paste, cut and paste, cut and paste. And they'll, by the way, most BDRs will do the same thing. So we said, no, you're going to have the homework assignment is you tell the client, you run it through ChatGPT, then you take that context, you run it over to Lavender, and Lavender tells you to cut it down based off all of its machine learning, and then you deploy it. Statistically, we went from a 17% response rate to a 22% response rate, but the highest team went from a 40% response rate to a 60% response rate. Now that's the good news. You want to hear the bad news?
Maybe not. No.
The bottom of the funnel didn't change a bit. In fact, we dropped off in efficacy down at the bottom of the funnel.
Interesting.
Now, my conjecture is this. I've established the view that I'm above average in my communication skills by using augmented intelligence. And then you talk to me. And I'm either average or below average in my ability to hold a meeting. I set an expectation and I can't live up to it.
Right.
So we have to, training comes back here, right, Michelle?
Right, right.
Oh my gosh, we better train people because they've got to be equal to.
Right.
And that's the generative AI gives us the average. Actually, it's above average when you think about it. If I can take the world's knowledge and then create an email, it's going to be better than the average email. But then the client's going to have an expectation that you're actually above average intelligence.
Right.
And they're going to be sorely disappointed when you then talk to them and say, yeah, hold on, let me get some coaching from ChatGPT.
Let me run your question through. Yeah.
I don't know what to say now. So
Right.
I think we've got a lot of exciting components in the field, and I'm actually pretty optimistic that this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But I'm really worried the classic sales machine will cause a lot of collateral damage too.
Yeah. What I'm hearing you say is there's a lot of opportunity.
Oh, there's tremendous opportunity.
So, yeah. And I think that's an interesting segue, just talking about the skills needed for success, because you're talking about relevancy and meeting buyer expectations, setting that expectation and then living up to it. I've got a few listed here on the screen, but I'm really curious to hear, and most of these came from your book, but I'm curious to hear more on your perspective in terms of skills that are needed for success in today's market.
Well, I think the first thing is list curation is huge. ICPs are huge. Make sure you're profiling your customer properly. I love some of the new work coming out by Matt Dixon. So brilliant on this idea on judging, the J of Jolt, right? It's, we've always known customer indecision is there, but I love this concept that we need to assess, are you even capable of changing? And with some of the new tools that we have, Hank Barnes over there at Gartner does some really good work on, God, he calls it ETA, and I forget what it refers to, but it's basically the capacity of an organization to adopt technology. And Hank's been studying this for years. But with some of the new personality profile technologies, and in full disclosure, I'm on the advisory board of XIQ, so I am biased here. But with the new technologies, we can not only determine if your personality type doesn't like change, we can also determine the composition of your buying team. And if you take these to natural extensions, you begin to say, well, wait a minute, if I could do that to a buying team, couldn't I prospect off the probability that a team, given the composition of the market, even before I actually contact you, could I actually begin to differentiate on the ability of companies to change off predictive analytics, and then only contact them off my ICP? So I do a customer profile with potential to change.
Right. Interesting. Woo! Yeah.
Now there's a velocity move, right?
Right. Now you're hyper focused in the right direction.
And then I'm relevant. Oh my gosh, Michelle, what if I was relevant? What if I was actually bringing value on top of all of this? So if I come to you and I've done my homework and I say, hey, I've actually looked at something. And by the way, there's some great work being done by Scott Gillum as well over at Carbon Design. He's talked about that when we seed, so when we actually move into a market, using the personality profiles and actually seeding with the right personalities. Don't just go after title, go after profile, because there are certain profiles that it's their job to find out, and it's their job to move the company forward. And there's others who are blockers.
Right.
So coming back to the challenger customer work, right? So there's just so much great work out there. And when we bring technology to bear, we actually can do phenomenal work with almost precision point accuracy. And, at the end of the day, it isn't that we shouldn't plow the white space, it's that we should plow the white space with strategic precision, and we can.
Yeah.
And we rev up the efficiency engine.
Yeah.
And when you do that, you just get phenomenal results.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned in the book, you talked a lot about understanding the customer journey and aligning with the customer and their buying process, as opposed to just thinking through focusing on, I'm going to get a meeting, I'm going to, find out what they want, do a demo, close the sale. It's really about where the customer is in their journey and their decision process.
And I definitely know that I'm talking to the Berkshire Group, not Gartner, but just in full disclosure, again,
Yeah.
Gartner's a partner of ours here
Yeah.
at the Center for Professional Sales. And so
Yeah.
we read a lot of their stuff. The jobs to be done framework is it's a very simplified process that Gartner put out there a few years ago. And I remember being in a meeting 5 or 6 years ago where that was being presented, and it was quite clear that no organizations were using that as their baseline framework. And so I decided we would try at UTD to make that our baseline, that we would teach students a framework of jobs to be done for buyers in complex space, and we would see if it made an impact. And does it, by the way, almost every methodology lays on that, because if you're in the problem ID phase, or I like to even call it the pre-problem ID phase, which means I haven't even identified I have a problem, or I've identified the wrong problem, any of those were in the problem ID phase. Well, then my messaging and my discovery is very distinct, because my goal is not close if it's a complex sale. My close is getting you to ID the problem.
Right.
It's kind of a mixture of Miller-Hyman, and let's break this up into stages and objectives. If you're in the search phase, well, why would I give you a demo? My goodness, why don't I show you everybody in my space and show you why, by the way, identify your problem again, right? Or you've got the problem figured out. Well, now let me tell, okay, here are all the people that can solve that solution. So what and you can actually get them to move over that phase into the requirements building moment. And so if I could show you what everybody's doing, then I said, well, what really matters to you? And then this is the beautiful phase, and some people might disagree with me, and I'm okay with that. I like to call myself a finesse seller, not a in-your-face seller, because that's the moment where I go, well, okay, if your requirements don't fit my offering, I'm out. Talk about velocity. I pull myself out and I go get somebody that I have a unique value proposition to their challenge.
Right.
And then I pull back. We had a major telecom company call me up a few years ago, and they said, hey, this is what we need. Here's the markets we're going to ramp up. And I said, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm the wrong fit. I said, well, we'd love to do business with you. There are 3 other universities I'm going to refer you to. They're going to be much better fit from the number of people you need to hire and your geographic needs. And also their pay was sub what we were getting. So we said, you wouldn't compete well. And there's these other places that would probably be better fits for you. I don't want you to come spend your money, your time, your resources, and then have you fail because your objective is something different. It was really odd because 6 months later, they called me back up and they said, okay, we're going to fund you. And they said, whoa, time out. I said, did you miss the point that we're a bad fit? They said, yeah, we know that. But here's the thing, everybody else wanted to take our money and no one else talked like you and want our salespeople to be like you. So even if we don't hire, we want to send our executives into your summits so that they can learn what you guys are teaching. And I said, wow, that's fascinating, right? Because I gave them what they needed to make the decision. They valued the relationship. They valued that I was going to help steer them. So this is the buyer's journey. And I love, for those of you who haven't seen the spaghetti map, if you're looking for the spaghetti map diagram that Gartner puts out there, that decision-making process is just very, very complex. Yeah. And if you're not confident that you're going to play that game, then go to a place you are confident you can play that game. Because once again, coming back to the no decision, why waste all of your valuable time, their valuable time, if they can't make a decision or you're the wrong decision? Yeah. And if you're constantly the wrong decision, then if you're the individual contributor, go work for the people that are the right decision, go get into the
Right.
people who can solve the problem. And I think this, so, once again, if I'm at the vendor selection phase, then I'm going to talk about vendor selection. So it changes who I'm talking to. And then if you layer all the models and the personality profiles and this analytics components on top of it. Now, when we talk about it, Michelle, does it sound like we need to hire different people?
I think it sounds like you have to be mindful of who you're hiring and maybe know who you are bringing onto your team. I think a lot of this can be trained, though.
Yes, so I agree. So you have one of two choices, because I think most companies are going to do the following cycle, and you're probably going to be the first place I'm going to talk about this cycle because I'm seeing it, and I'm pretty sure lots of companies are going to do this. Most companies are becoming painfully aware they have the wrong people on the bus.
Yeah.
So you and I know there's one of two choices here. Number one, we retrain the people on the bus, right? We retool them to the moment that they're in, or we get different people on the bus. So here's what I think is going to happen. Based off all the layoffs we're seeing, I think most people are getting new people on the bus because they think they can hire better because there's so much talent that's free and available right now. So I think I'm going to switch people from the bus. I'm going to get the people that are outperforming on our bus off the bus. Then I'm going to bring in new people, because then we don't need to train them because they're experienced, right? I don't know how many quarters this is going to take. My prediction is going to be in the 2024. I don't know if it's Q1, Q2, or Q3, but I don't think it's going to happen this year. Now, for those of you who are executives, you could accelerate this pain problem if you'd like to accelerate it. Maybe you should talk to either the Berks Group or me, and we can help you get past this a lot faster. But most companies are going to do this. They're going to say, well, let's switch people on the bus. Let's go get better experienced people, higher performing people because they're available. And then they're going to figure it out after 1 or 2 quarters of poor performance that, oh my gosh, that wasn't the solution. We still have the wrong people on the bus.
Yes. Experience does not necessarily equate to success.
Especially given the sassification of the space.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have people that don't have the proper emotions for the moment we're in, and the skills for the moment we're in. And so then they're going to have the epiphany. They're going to go, oh, I've either got to train or I've got to go get new people, but I got to train the new people in the modern way. And I had one of those phone calls yesterday. I was like, wow, somebody went cycle already. And this guy, now he got lucky because he hired 2 of my people over the last 3 years, and he hired a couple of people from Baylor. And Andrea Dixon at Baylor does phenomenal work. And we've borrowed and learned from Baylor and been challenged by them, like a lot of our other friends. And so this guy said, yeah, we were hiring experience. And then we saw these sales trained students from college. And he said, we need to do that. He said, they're operating at a different level than the other people we have on the bus. So he said, so we're preparing for next year. So this is a year in advance. They're preparing for this onboarding. They said a year from now, when we add people back in, we're going to make a huge investment in getting people with modern motions that are coming out of sales programs. And I was really impressed. I thought, wow. But I think that's a forward-thinking company. Maybe part of this 5%. An HBR case has been written about that company. So I'm not shocked that they're ahead of the curve. But most companies are going to actually replace the people on the bus. They're not going to hire young people. They're going to hire experienced people with 3, 5, 10 years of experience. And many of them are going to go, well, that didn't work.
Yeah.
And so I think the future is bright for training companies, but I think it's going to be late this year, early next year, that everybody gets to that epiphany that,
Yeah.
still didn't work.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
hopefully the smarter companies will accelerate that pattern and break out. And you could create some market dominance if you get this faster than your peers. So
Yeah. I mean, I think you are speaking our language when you talk about, hiring appropriately or effectively. Like, just hiring somebody with experience does not equate to automatic success. So being much more careful and conscientious about who you're hiring and the skills and the capabilities that they bring, just the raw material to begin with. And I think also training and equipping the people that you have on your team. We would even say, like, let's just assess and understand what those baseline skills are for the people that are on, the existing people on the team. Understand where you need to train. Is it things like questioning skills to understand, do they have the skills to really be able to question buyers and understand their buying process and their journey? Do they have the outreach and prospecting skills to the know-how to craft that relevant message, or to prioritize? And as you were talking about, spending time on the right opportunities. If it's not qualified, if they're not ready to buy, it's not a good fit for your solution, move on. So I think those are really important aspects and steps that customers and organizations should be taking. And that was a big takeaway too from your book, really focusing on that, building that effectiveness.
well, I think that's the beauty. When I first wrote the book, I thought this was an executive challenge. And so the last 3 chapters of the book, the section on inertia, was not there. And my friend Nanda Kumar, who is a Chicago trained economist, I went in and he's a game theorist, like a beautiful mind. So I said, hey, I think there's this game that executives are literally, there's the optimal solution is to vacillate between 2 concepts. I know I'm getting very academic. I'll get to the point quickly. And I said, it's that they really want to do this like clean cut harvest, and then they've got to go hire a farmer, and then clean cut harvest, and then farmer. And so I think that's what's going on. And he just looked at me and said, I think you're wrong. And he said, you need to go talk to more executives. I was so furious at him. I was like, dude, what do you think I've been doing for the last 10 years? I've been talking to executives. I know what's going on. He said, no, you don't. He said, you got to look at the incentive systems. And then COVID hit. And so it allowed me to kind of take a pause, because I had to modify everything to deliver courses in COVID style. And, gee, we all know what happened. And as I came back to it, this is the epiphany that happened. I started getting texts from the students that were being taught the jobs to be done framework and some of this areas of analytics, relevancy, buyer journey mapping, and business acumen. And they started reporting. It started with one student who walked into a tech sector company. She had pipeline open as part of her goal. She had to open pipeline. And everybody on our team was between 5 and 10 years of experience. She had 1 year. It was her first quarter at the new job. She'd only had 1 year in the field at another job. In her first quarter, she was 10x. And I said, can I publish this? And she goes, no, this is internal. No, oh, shoot, delete it off your phone. Don't, because she was really worried. She's like, I showed you because I want to tell you that, hey, thank you for helping me. And I said, well, okay, can I interview you? He said, yes, I'll let you interview me. And then I found like 4 other students who were in the same boat, one over at IBM that was running 800% of her quota in COVID. And then we had 2 other people in some tech sectors. One of them was #1 in North America. The other one was #1 on the globe for one of the top technology firms. And as I talked to them, this concept of effectiveness was their whole thrust. And then they added the efficiency engines. And what this taught me is that individual contributors can make the difference. It doesn't have to be org. It doesn't even have to be team. So you could do it at the individual level, you could do it at the team level, you could do it at division level, you could do it at the company level. That really requires some change management, some amazing leadership, but I've seen it done. But it's more likely to be done down in smaller groups where you can kind of contain the inertia from the classic sales machine. So.
Excellent point. On that note, and as we're talking about individual effectiveness, one of the points we've been talking about is the skill set of the sales team. And if we have any participants out here that are interested in kind of assessing your own skill set or a team member skill set, we are offering a complimentary selling skills index assessment. There's a QR code right here on the screen that if you scan, it will take you to the assessment. There will also be a link for this in the follow-up email. So we would welcome you taking the assessment. You will get a report, about 10 pages, with the overall results of baseline selling skills, prospecting, questioning skills, creating value with a solution, closing skills, etc. So we hope you'll take advantage of that. And we are at the end of our time. So just want to show you all a few key takeaways, obviously focusing on effectiveness first, adding the efficiencies with technology. And Dr. Dover, you've mentioned that throughout the conversation, assessing your team skill sets, training to gaps. One thing that's not on here is hiring effectively, not just relying on experience as you're bringing in new sellers and getting new folks on the bus. We would also say coach your sellers to probe and to really align and understand the customer's journey. We didn't talk a lot about building a culture of agility and innovation, but I would encourage you to check out Dr. Dover's book because he goes into that and talks about the importance of building in that customer focus into the culture. And we are at time, but if you've got any questions and want to pop them into the chat, we will we'll address those or follow up after the webinar with your answers. We do have one question, and I'm curious, Dr. Dover, to get your perspective on this. Ashley asks, before COVID, salespeople made a point of selling to the business owner or CEO in a physical one-to-one meeting. And it seems that after COVID, salespeople are happy to sell to buyers and lower level managers. So is this a trend that we are seeing here in the USA? I believe she's probably maybe located overseas. But your thoughts on that? I mean, I kind of have an opinion, but I'm curious to get your perspective.
Well, first off, I'm going to have to go with, I don't think I have the data to answer that question because I think that's a moving target. Yeah. What I'm hearing, it depends on the complexity of the deal, right? I mean, if we're talking in the transactional space, I think that may be the case, or if it's a smaller deal. But if we're talking about a complex deal, I'm actually hearing that more executives are getting involved in meetings. I think Gong and some other people have been releasing that like CFOs are in a high percentage of closing meetings right now. I may have the source wrong, but I think I'm hearing data counter to that concept. But that doesn't mean that for a smaller deal or smaller, like the midsize or even the SMB segment, that we aren't seeing something different. So I think I'd follow the data and get some sources on that, but I think it's a moving target. Yeah, I've heard and seen that same data with more C-level executives joining on the buyer side. I wonder in Ashley's case, because we see this a lot with clients, is that perhaps the messaging isn't resonating to upper level executives. And so it may be that they're it's not so much that they're happy at that level, it's just what they're used to, and they haven't found the relevant messaging to really compel someone at a higher level to join those conversations. Well, that's the hypothesis. I think this comes back to Scott Gillam's work. This idea that we, the ICP, and Beck Holland calls it the ICPT, right? It's the ideal customer profile title. I would go further to say ideal customer profile role with personality.
Right.
Because if I am someone that delegates all of my fact finding to somebody I trust, you could kind of know that by looking at their org structure and looking at the personality profiles, and realize that if there's an I sitting in an exec team or close to an exec team, I think I'd be starting with the I. Because I wants to find information. It's in the challenger customer space, it's the mobilizer, right? That's the person who needs to go. They're trusted internally with the organization to go get the data and bring it to those people who you used to talk to. So I think Scott Gillam's work would say that's strategically smart if you're in the early stages.
Right. Good point. Good point.
I don't know if it's
I
think for successful people, it's a trend line.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today. It's been a really great, informative conversation. I want to encourage everyone to check out your book, The Sales Innovation Paradox. As I said, I read it, I highlighted it, I bookmarked it, just a ton of really interesting information. And I think some great lessons for sales organizations really looking to improve both the efficiency and the effectiveness of their teams. And just a note to our audience, our next webinar is going to be on August 1st. Overcoming adversity in sales is going to be our topic, and we'll be joined by our CEO, Spencer Wixom. So we hope you'll join us then, and look for the webinar recording in your email box soon. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Dr. Dover. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Michelle. It's been enjoyable.